Hello everyone. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will learn about the main components of a computer system. We'll start by covering the hardware components followed by the logical or software components. By the end of the lesson, you will be able to identify and explain the function of each component. Also, you will understand how these components work together to make your computer function properly. So let's dive in. First up, we have the central processing unit, which is also known as the CPU. You can think of the CPU as the brain of the computer. It's responsible for executing the instructions that come from the programs that you run. So whenever you do something on your computer, like opening a file or running a program, those actions are handled by the CPU one step at a time. The CPU does this by performing three types of operations. Basic arithmetic operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Logic operations like comparing numbers or characters and making decisions based on the results. Control operations such as fetching instructions from memory and coordinating the activities of other components. Input and output operations such as receiving data from input devices like a keyboard or mouse and sending data to output devices like a monitor or printer. The CPU has three main parts. The first part is the ALU, which stands for Arithmetic Logic Unit. As the name suggests, the ALU performs all the calculations and logic operations. For example, if you're adding two numbers in a spreadsheet, the ALU will perform the actual addition. The next part is the CU, which stands for the Control Unit. The CU is like the manager of the CPU. It directs the flow of data and instructions within the CPU and between the CPU and other components. For example, the CU will fetch instructions from the memory, decode them, and then issue commands to the various parts of the CPU to execute those instructions. The third part is the registers. These are small units that hold data temporarily while the CPU is working on it. For example, the CPU might hold an address from the memory in a register so that it can quickly access the data at that address. The next component is the RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory. You can think of the RAM as the short-term memory of the computer. And like the storage drive, the RAM is volatile, which means that it loses its data when the power goes off. When you turn on your computer, it loads the operating system and other essential programs into the RAM so that they can run quickly. And as you use your computer, it brings in any other programs or data that you need into the RAM. For example, if you open a file from the storage drive, the RAM copies the file into itself so that you can edit it. Now if you don't have anything specific loaded into your RAM, it will still have some things in there that are required for the computer to operate. This includes things like firmware and the kernel of the operating system. These things are loaded into the RAM before the computer is turned on and are used to boot up the rest of the operating system. The advantage of using the RAM is that it's much faster than the storage drive. So it's perfect for holding data and programs that need to be accessed quickly. But the downside of using the RAM is that it's very expensive. So it doesn't hold that much data. That's why when you close a program, it gets removed from the RAM so that the computer can free up space for other programs. The next component is the storage drive, which is also known as the hard disk drive or solid-state drive. You can think of the storage drive as the long-term memory of the computer. It's used to store all of your files, including your operating system and installed programs. There are two types of storage drives, the HDD or hard disk drive and the SSD or solid-state drive. The HDD is a traditional mechanical hard drive that uses spinning disks to store and retrieve data. It is slower but cheaper and can store large amounts of data for a relatively low cost per gigabyte. The SSD is a newer type of storage drive that uses flash memory to store data. It is much faster than the HDD and has no moving parts, so it is more reliable and consumes less power. However, it's also more expensive and can't store as much data for the same price. Next up, we have the GPU or Graphics Processing Unit. As the name suggests, the GPU is responsible for rendering images, videos, and other graphics. Most CPUs come with an integrated GPU that shares the same memory space as the CPU. But some more sophisticated applications like gaming or video editing may require more processing power. In that case, you can add a dedicated GPU like an NVIDIA or AMD card. These cards typically have thousands of cores, which are smaller processors that work together to render complex images and videos. Alright, now let's talk about another important component called the motherboard. You can think of the motherboard as the central hub of the computer. It's a large circuit board that contains the CPU socket, RAM slots, storage drive interfaces, and other expansion slots for additional components like the GPU. The motherboard also provides various ports for connecting input and output devices. It also contains the chipset which manages the flow of data between the CPU and other components. The motherboard basically provides the platform on which all the other components are installed and connected. Without it, the components wouldn't be able to communicate with each other. Next, we have the power supply unit, also known as the PSU. It's like the power bank of the computer. Its job is to convert the alternating current AC from the wall outlet into direct current DC that the computer components can use. The PSU also provides different voltages to the various components. For example, the CPU might require a higher voltage than the RAM or storage drive. Without the PSU, the components wouldn't have the power they need to work. And finally, we have the cooling system. You can think of the cooling system as the air conditioner of the computer. Its job is to prevent the CPU, GPU, and other components from overheating. The cooling system typically consists of fans, heat sinks, and sometimes liquid cooling. The fans and heat sinks are passive cooling methods that dissipate heat through convection. The liquid cooling method, on the other hand, uses a pump and a radiator to circulate liquid that absorbs heat from the components. Without the cooling system, the components would quickly overheat and damage the computer. Now let's move on to the input and output devices. Input devices allow you to interact with the computer and give it instructions. Some examples include a keyboard for inputting text and commands, a mouse or touchpad for controlling the pointer, and a scanner or webcam for capturing images, or a microphone for capturing audio. On the other hand, output devices receive data from the computer and present it to you in a usable format. Some examples include a monitor for displaying visuals, a printer for printing documents, and speakers for outputting sound. Another important component is the network interface card, or NIC. It's a hardware component that allows the computer to connect to a local network or the internet. In modern times, most computers also come with a wireless Wi-Fi adapter so you can connect to networks without having to plug in an Ethernet cable. Moving on to software components, the first thing we need to talk about is the operating system, or OS. You can think of the OS as the master controller of the computer. It manages the hardware and software resources and provides a user interface for interacting with the computer. The OS also manages files, runs applications, and ensures that everything runs smoothly. Examples of operating systems include Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, and iOS. Next, we have device drivers. They are small programs that allow the OS to communicate with the hardware components. For example, a printer driver allows the OS to send print jobs to the printer. Next, we have system utilities. These are programs that help you maintain and optimize your computer. Some examples include antivirus software, backup software, and disk defragmenter. Finally, we have application software. These are programs that you use to perform specific tasks. Examples include word processors, web browsers, games, IDEs or integrated development environments, image editors, and so on. So that was our quick overview of the main hardware and software components of a computer system. If you found this helpful, please remember to like and share and put down your comment. And thank you for watching.